we had actually started the conversation on getting you into the podcast, and it was literally like a day or two later where you were like, "Hey, man, a tree fell through my house," which at first sounded kind of like my dog ate my homework,
Yeah.
but it was like a legit thing that happened to you, man.
Yeah, it was real. And we moved in. We had not even paid our first mortgage,
Oh.
and it hit the house, and it's just been nonstop since.
Hey, everybody, welcome to our podcast, Enjoy College on Purpose. This podcast is all about helping people make the most out of college. My name's Ish, and I'm your host. And one of the things that I get to do in my life is I spend a lot of time with college students. And one thing that really stands out about college students is you are busy. And so, what I want to do with this podcast is I want to spend about 25 minutes and I want to interview a professional, someone that I really admire and look up to. And we're going to do two things with them. We're going to look back on their college journey, try and dig for some nuggets there. And so I'm actually really, really excited about my guest today. And I say this about everybody, but this guy that we're bringing in today, he's one of my closest friends. And Zach, I actually tried to bring you earlier into the podcast, and then like a tree fell through your house, so we had to postpone it, man. But here's what I absolutely love about Zach, especially in the college space. What you need to know about Zach is Zach is the definition of a legacy student. You know, went to school at a place where generations before him left an impact. And what's amazing about that is Zach has found a way to carve his own path. So I'm super excited about this. Zach, thank you for being here, man. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, dude.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And one of the first questions I always like to ask is, what are you up to these days, man? What does professional life look like for you? Share as much about your personal life as you would like to. But yeah, man, brag about yourself for about 90 seconds.
Sure. Married to Ashley Worley. Got 4 kids: Molly, Lincoln, Milo, and Ruthie. We're now living in Tennessee, and I'm working as the creative manager in the marketing department of a company called Wesley LLC. And it's been good, man. The weather's great. The trees are changing colors. Sorry about all the boxes. You're right. The tree fell in our house, and we're currently all packed up and getting our house all fixed up. So we're
Yeah.
almost there. It's good.
Dude, and I can imagine just that how gnarly that situation was. I know on my end, we had actually started the conversation on getting you into the podcast, and it was literally like a day or two later where you were like, "Hey, man, a tree fell through my house," which at first sounded kind of like my dog ate my homework,
Yeah.
but it was like a legit thing that happened to you, man.
Yeah, it was real. And we moved in. We had not even paid our first mortgage,
Oh,
and it hit the house, and it's just been nonstop since then.
oh, dude, that's nuts, man. Dude, so love to kind of hear a little bit more about your actual college experience, because obviously that's where we connected, that's where we met in college. So just kind of try and paint a picture of like, man, this is what my college journey really looked like throughout my college years.
Yeah, so leading into college, it was interesting. The mentality that I had was kind of a go with the flow kind of guy, and I in hindsight I recognized that I had that luxury because the school that I was going to, that I graduated high school from, my mom was teaching at, and it just kind of fed into DCC. I mean, literally, so it was a private school, and our Bible teacher at that school was going to the college DCC, and was teaching basically what she was learning from Mark Barrier,
Yeah.
and literally just I was like learning what she was learning, but in high school, and so it just kind of fed directly into DCC. And like you said, there's a legacy there. And so, my grandfather helped he was at the beginning of the college, and then my dad went there, my mom went there, and then my dad worked there, my mom worked there. And so it just kind of like flowed into it. I never really had to struggle with like, oh, what college am I going to? Or
Mm,
I got to get like my applications in. It was more of like, hey, can I talk to Crystal so I can just like figure out what I need to do to go here, because I'm gonna go here. And so that kind of had my mentality be like, just go with the flow, it'll be fine.
mm,
And so that's what kind of started my college career as well, where it's just kind of like, yeah, I'm on the DCC campus again, and this time I'm actually sitting in the classes, then doing this thing. And I will say that being a legacy and being like on campus of the college that I was growing up,
Hmm.
it was weird whenever I actually became a student because I looked around and everybody felt like this older, more mature. They didn't seem like my peers because
Hmm.
for all the way up until I was 18, and I was actually 19 whenever I got into college. And even though they were my peers, I was like, everyone here is more qualified than me to be here. Like everyone is a student at DCC. And so I had a really hard time getting over this, like, I'm still a kid running around the campus. And so I had a different experience, that's for sure.
I'm curious about that whole deal because I remember going to college and the resident director had kids there, and not those kids have grown up, but I'm definitely thinking about them, because they were kind of in that same spot of
Mm.
seeing all of us. So in my head, I'm like, man, we were just 18 to 21-year-olds. We're boneheads. To them, we're like full fledged adults. If we say something, those kids have to like
Mhm.
treat us at respect their elders, which was it's such a funky thing to think about. How did you make that shift, that mindset set shift from I'm just a kid amongst a bunch of giants to like I am one of them? Was it as simple as enrolling for college, or did something else have to take place?
Yeah, it was a progression. I do remember that, like, it was maybe the first couple of years because, like, coming in as a freshman, you still do have older, juniors, seniors, whatever. Then you have some adults that are coming in to do their college career. So, like, there were still older people that were students.
Mm-hmm.
And so it probably wasn't until I was, year two, maybe even three, that I saw the new students coming in. And I'm like, dang, y'all are young. Like, yeah, which is silly because they're only like 2 years younger than me. But it's like, but there's a difference in the experience that I had from freshman year to junior-ish year where there was a lot of growth. And so that's probably when it shifted for me that I was like, "Oh, okay, I'm supposed to be here."
That's interesting, because you're saying that you had these younger classes come in. So I was a part of one of those younger classes.
Mhm.
And, I knew who Zach Worley was by reputation. Obviously your dad worked at the school. I think your mom was also like adjunct faculty at the time. We
Yeah.
knew who their kids were. So when I first interacted with you, certainly there was that differential of like, oh man, this guy's 2 years older. But in my head, it was even bigger than that because I was like, man, this kid like ran around here in diapers. So like, if someone really knows how this place is wired and how it works, it's not just some cat who's been here 2 years longer than me. It's this guy who like he probably got in trouble doing some stuff here, kind of a
Oh,
thing.
for
And
sure. Yeah.
and so then for me it was just kind of this bigger hurdle. It seemed like I'm like, oh man, I'm never going to measure up if this is what it takes to try and thrive in a campus like this. And you were super welcoming, man. I mean, that go with the flow thing that you're talking about, I mean, I picked up on that in 2 seconds, where you're just like, hey man, forget about the reputation, it's just you and me here,
Yeah.
let's have a conversation. And the rest is history from there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. There's definitely plenty of times that I got in trouble running around the campus, not only from my parents, but, like, for instance, our some of our professors, they felt like, like weird uncles, like, and so I would say I was probably maybe, I don't know if too comfortable is the right word, but I definitely felt at home way more than I'm sure any other students did. And at the same time, I was fully aware of, like, whose son I am. And so I kinda had this, like, interesting kind of feel to it. But I don't know, I never put a whole lot of weight to that. Like, I enjoyed people, I enjoyed being around people, I enjoyed meeting people,
Mm,
And because I was so comfortable with the campus and everything else that, like, it was kinda easy for me to be like, "Hey, man, how's it going?" Like, I wouldn't say I was intentionally seeking out to welcome people, like, I know it sounds bad, but I wasn't like, "Hey, new guy," but it was very much like, if I had an interaction with you, I tried to, well, I get naturally was kinda just like, I wanted to have a kind of a welcoming presence and just kinda, like, chill out the whole "I'm Mark Worley's son,"
mm,
'cause he was essentially, like, the college principal at the time, and so,
sure.
like, if you got in trouble or anything like that, like, you kinda had a negative a negative experience with my dad, and so by proximity, it was like, "Hey, you're Mark Worley's son," and I just had to, like, sit in a room with him and, like,
Mm.
4 other VPs and get in trouble, and I'm like, "Okay. Do you wanna go get some pizza or, like, what?" It's all good, man. Like, I don't even know what you're talking about. I really don't. So, it was very it felt like my name mattered, in the ways that it should, and in the ways that it wasn't real and it was more perception, I just didn't care.
Yeah. So there's college kiddos out there, college students who certainly the legacy thing it is a part of it. Their parents went to the same school, maybe their grandparents went to the same school, but then there's also these college students out there who, and I don't know what the term is for it because they're not necessarily legacy students, but like their parents work at the school or something like
Yeah.
that, you know,
Yeah,
or dad's like one of the coaches for one of the sports teams and has been there. So in a sense, even though they're not legacy kids, man, they're stepping into these spaces where it's like, hey, man, my family precedes me,
yeah.
even
Mhm,
though I'm trying to figure out my own path forward.
mhm.
And so, like, what floats to the top of your mind for that college student on, like, hey, if you're stepping into a college campus where your family's name precedes you,
Mhm.
you know, what, how do you stand out? How do you stand out? What tangible kind of next steps can this student take to still carve out their own journey?
Yeah. So, a lot of my experience kinda leapfrogs? There we go.
Yeah.
A lot of my experience jumps through time with, like, young, lessons from, like, when I was a real little kid, and then it just kinda compounded over time. So one of the a good example of my mentality going into this was my grandma, the same grandma that talked to me about driving. She was my first grade teacher and growing up, and so like as in at my school, not like homeschooled, but like at my school with a class. And I remember she would not let me call her grandma when we were in class. She said, "You need to call me Miss Latch," and I was like, "Yeah, but you're grandma, so like, what's happening here?" And that was the first experience that I had of when
Mm,
we're in this place, this is what's correct. When we're in this place, this is what's appropriate. And so like any other time, sure, your grandma and like, love you, grandma latch, Christmas, all that kind of stuff. But as soon as we're in the class, you are a student and I'm a teacher and you need to give that respect. Fast forward a little bit and it was kind of the same way where it's like, hey dad, how's it going? I can walk into your office pretty much anytime or whatever. But I needed to recognize that in if I can tell he's about to have a hard meeting or something like that, like, Zach, you cannot just walk in here. Like,
mm,
you're at that point, you're a student, you don't need to be part of this conversation, whatever. And then if you fast forward even more, I wound up actually working at the college as the creative director of marketing. And I remember having a conversation with my dad, and I was like, and because he was a VP of advancement at the time. And so marketing works a lot with advancement. And so I was like, hey, here's the deal. I'm the marketing guy and you're the VP. So if we're ever in a meeting and like just take off the son hat and the dad hat and just have the VP and the marketing guy hats on and we'll make sure to keep that separate from anything else. And so if I do a good job, great. If I mess up somewhere and you got to like discipline or do whatever you got to do, it's the same way that you do with anybody else, do that. And so I think what it is make sure that if there is a student that's going to college that has a parent that's involved with the college, recognize the difference between the relationship with your family and the relationship with the institutionalized structure.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're coming in as a student and they're a coach or whatever, if you're playing on the team, that's your coach. During that time, that's your coach. The benefit that you have is that you have a little bit of a deeper understanding of when he or she is saying something in a certain way or coaching in a certain way. You kind of have an extra context that you can draw from,
Mm-hmm.
but you still need to make sure that you're part of the team and you are the player and they are the coach. And that's going to do two things for you. One, it's going to make you a better whatever that is, a better student, a team player. And it's also going to it's going to help level the playing field for those who are your peers, right? So like you already have this stigmatism that like you're probably going to be the favorite because it's your parent that is that thing. But if you kind of have that mentality of that like they're the coach, I'm a player, then it's going to help like draw people into you, like your peers, because you're not leaning into the thing that you could lean into,
Mm-hmm.
which is, hey dad, I want to play more, or I want to, can I get the best dorm room because I know you can make it happen. Instead, be like, I know that I could have that conversation, but it's not right. So, hey, dorm parent or, whatever, resident director, put me in whatever dorm room you think I should be in.
Yeah.
So I think acknowledging it is probably the best way forward.
Yeah. No, and this is so good because you're diving into some insight that is applicable in something bigger than the legacy context or, the my family's name precedes me on this campus situation. I mean, one of the ways I talk about this concept you're sharing about is essentially understanding boundaries, knowing the roles involved and the environments that you're standing in. And this is so applicable even in other relationships. So I think about, roommates in college who that's certainly a role and an environment that y'all have to acknowledge. Gosh, we share the same room. There's a lot of shared responsibilities that we have to engage in, and this is the environment that we're in, the room that we live in, or the suite. If you've got suite mates or whatever, and then that completely changes when those same two roommates will step on and be on the same soccer team together or something, or those same classmates maybe work on campus and one of them's a supervisor, the other one is just a typical employee for the coffee shop on campus or whatever, and just kind of having this constant awareness of like, hey, what are the roles involved here and what are the environments here, what environment are we in, it, and this actually even translates later on in life down the line. So for me, where I see it, I spend a little bit of time in the Salesforce space, database administration, for anybody who doesn't know that. And that's very quickly one of the questions I have to answer anytime I step into some kind of a meeting with people. Hey, what roles are we playing, and in what context is this conversation taking place? Because sometimes I'm having a conversation with a supervisor and we're doing a review on my annual performance. Other times I'm having a conversation as I'm literally just consulting on a project. I'm not doing any of the day to day and people just want my insight. Other times it's my responsibility to see this project through, but it has to do with a process that I have like zero awareness. Like I don't know anything about this process. And
Mhm.
so then whoever I'm bringing into this conversation, they might be an expert, they might be a department head or something, but just being always aware of the roles and environments is so applicable in all kinds of different situations. Super insightful, man.
Yeah, one of the things that was interesting that I didn't realize. So this may jump into like I wish I knew this back then.
Mm-hmm.
I did not realize that I had my own reputation. Like I didn't fully get it until it was after college. and I was like, all of a sudden, I was more. I had a stronger idea of what my direction in life was. I was married and had a kid, and so like I was much more driven than I ever was as a in college or younger. And a lot of what I do now has been self-taught. And
Mm.
so then coming back on campus to work there, it was one of those things where it's like, oh yeah, Zach, the guy who like didn't really care. Or, oh
Mm.
yeah, Zach, the guy who just kind of like showed up when he wanted to.
So you had a reputation as a student that then followed you now that you were a professional, part of the
Yeah.
staff of the college.
Yeah, I would say, and honestly, again, because of the whole legacy thing, like not just as a student, but even as a
Mm.
kid.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm,
so
mm-hmm.
everyone there knew me as like, I mean, I can't tell you how many conversations I've had of like, oh yeah, I remember when you used to sat on my lap during that thing, and I'm like, yeah, well, I'm 38 now, sir. So, and like, but people have a memory of me during that time, and if they haven't seen me in a while, then they don't see any kind of progression.
Mm.
And so that's the only thing they can base off of how they know me. And so jumping back into that world when they knew me this way, and I had had this amount of time of significant things happening, right? Like career direction, marriage, kid, all that kind of stuff. I did find myself weirdly more so having to kind of prove myself, not because I was a Worley, but because I was trying to work off this reputation that I didn't realize was so strong. Like
Mm.
not just the Worley side of things, but the Zach side of things. And I didn't realize that was happening so much when it was happening.
What floats to the top of your mind as far as like a piece of advice or a hack on, how do I find out what my reputation is?
Mm.
Because on the one hand, I think as humans, it's very easy to have blind spots, and we kind of have these like perceived thoughts of like, here's how I believe people see me. But like, is there a way to actually go out there and truly figure out like, man, what is my reputation?
Yeah. So I've got I actually know exactly when I started to learn this. There was much like a lot of people out there, there was a small little dark period of just bad decisions that I was making in life. And there was a friend of mine that he came to me and he was like, "Hey, you're like kind of being a jerk right now, right? Like, I mean, it's fine, but like you're being a jerk." And I was
Mm.
like, "But I'm Zach. Like my perception of myself was like I was a nice guy, right? Like I'm not a jerk. I'm a nice guy, and like I get along with everybody. And I don't understand why you're saying that." And and to his credit, he stuck with it, and it kind of you know rocked our friendship pretty hard because I wasn't ready to hear it. And it wasn't until after he we had that kind of conversation, and then, something else happened and I was like, "Wow, oh crap." Like that's something that the nice guy Zach should feel bad about, but I don't feel bad about it right now, and that scares me. Like that
Mm.
shows me that I'm kind of on the wrong path here, and maybe there is some validity to what he was saying. And so I then kind of vowed to myself, I was like, I have to be like very honest with myself, and I cannot rely on my own perspective because I can lose perspective of who I am. And so what I try to do is I either have a close friends, or I usually try to find this at a workplace where I can find a trusted source to say,
Mm.
hey, once a month or whatever, I'd like to ask you like, hey, what is like my reputation? Like if you were to,
Yeah.
or what is, if you can give me a perspective of like how I am, or like whatever. And if I do recognize that maybe there is a kind of a weak point, I can ask about it. Like, hey, do you notice that is this something that I do or not do? Or like I'm just trying to get some bearings on what's actually true. and what's like perceived outwardly. And I got to be ready and willing to hear hard answers. If they say, again, let's take it back. Like, yeah, you're acting kind of lazy.
Hmm.
Okay. I thought I was working hard, but got it. All right, good to know. Like you just got to take if you're asking for it, then you got to take that honesty. Otherwise, you'll lose that feed. If you just fight with them all the time, then they're going to be like, I'm not going to I don't want to have a conversation with you about how I think you could improve when you just get mad at me every time. In fact,
Hmm.
that's something you can improve on.
Yeah. Totally.
So that's kind of how I try to keep my bearings on stuff is just check-ins every so often with people,
Hmm.
and then be ready to course correct.
No, and that's so insightful, man. This idea of like positioning yourself for success. When you go into a new environment these days, whether it's a new job or a new client or something like that, to have that go-to person and make this request of them. Hey, can I check in every so often? One other thing that I tell people is, just practice some curiosity around the feedback that you get. If somebody comes back and tells you, hey, you're being lazy, or hey, here's what we're noticing about you, like, that's fine. Receive it with a grain of salt, and then see if you can get the same result from some other people in your life. Hey, I recently received some feedback that said I'm lazy, or that I speak too long in meetings. Are you seeing the same thing? And almost look for confirmation, and try and get detailed about how to improve in this potentially, just so
Well,
you don't get in that pitfall of unnecessarily buying into something that might just be biased.
yeah, and to kind of put that in a nutshell for me, the thing that comes to mind is like if you're looking for truth, then you're not going to be looking for one source or
Mm,
looking at one source. Anytime anybody is looking for any kind of truth, you've got to have at least more than one source to kind of like compare and be like, oh, okay, if three people are saying that, it's probably true versus just one.
dude, that's so insightful, man. So we're hitting the end of the show, Zach. But if anybody from our audience wanted to connect with you, is there a best way to do that? Any kind of socials or email address or a website that people could connect with you on?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just Zach Worley on pretty much any platform. If anybody does have a question and they want to ask, you can email me at zach@storystack.com. It's stack without a C because, college education you can't spell. That's what it is.
That's funny.
Uh, so yeah, Zach@storystack.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Zach, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, no problem, man.
Yeah, and to all our listeners, thanks for joining us today and listening to this episode of Enjoy College on Purpose. I want to leave you with one final request. On this platform that you're listening to this episode on, would you please leave a rating and a comment for the podcast? This is actually very helpful. It helps us overcome all the algorithms and ultimately spread the word on this podcast and our amazing guests to be as helpful as we possibly can. So thanks again for listening, and we'll see y'all next time.